Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. Hello. Thank you very much. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and the first time we've taken State of the Nation on the road. And tonight we are live from Scunthorpe in the Fordingham Community Centre. And tonight, as you may have guessed, it's all about steel. Just down the road from us, in the British Steel Works, it employs thousands of people. But, as we've just seen in the case of Port Talbot, recently jobs are at risk. Tonight, we'll be assessing the effects of the green agenda on steel production, and I'll also be speaking to a man who's worked at the steelworks for nearly 50 years. But there's also much more to come. Everything from migration to the triple lock to a cashless society. Most importantly, I'll be speaking to the people of Scunthorpe who are here with me in this room tonight. They are leading and determining the agenda. State of the Nation starts now. I've also brought along with me my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the economist and fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies, Catherine McBride. All of that is to come after what you've been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst, who I hope is going to tell you that the monkey has been found, the one that was lost in the Highlands.
Jacob, thank you and good evening to you. Well, first of all, we'll start with some breaking news. 2 teenage boys have been charged with the murders of teenagers Mason Wrist and Max Dixon in Bristol. Last weekend, we understand one is aged 15, the other 16. The two due to appear in Bristol in a youth court tomorrow. Full details tomorrow on GB News. And the suspect in the South London chemical attack was given asylum in the UK. That's what government sources have told GB News tonight. It's understood Abdul Ezadi failed twice in previous asylum applications, but was ultimately successful. The alleged attacker is on the run after injuring a mother and children with a corrosive substance in London last night. The 35-year-old's believed to be from the Newcastle area and was seen fleeing the scene immediately after the attack. Well, police have released a new image of the suspect's last known sighting, showing he himself has a significant injury on the right side of his face. Police are appealing to the public, particularly in the northeast of England, where he's believed to have fled, to report any sightings. And the Labour leader said he has a plan for business that will bring growth and prosperity to every corner of Britain today. It was in a speech to Labour's business conference, and Sir Keir Starmer promised to battle against stagnation in British productivity and growth. Critics accused Labour of economic flip-flopping and questioned whether or not the party could provide the stability businesses need. Inflation is expected to temporarily return to the Bank of England's target of 2% by this summer, a year and a half after it was previously expected. The news coming today as the bank held its interest rate at 5.25% for the fourth time in a row. Labour is saying households are paying the price of 14 years of economic failure under the Conservatives. But the Chancellor said today the government's plan is working. The couple are expected to stand trial over the alleged arson attack on the Justice Minister Mike Freer's constituency office in London. The pair deny the charges. The Tory MP for Finchley and Golders Green described the incident as the final straw that made him quit politics after receiving a series of death threats. Now, the EU has some serious questions about a UK government deal to restore power sharing in Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, the Commons heard two key pieces of legislation on goods traded between Northern Ireland and the UK will underline the government's commitment to Northern Ireland's position in the UK. The second aims to end all routine checks on goods from Britain to Northern Ireland, initially introduced after Brexit. Well, Jacob, I was going to tell you about Queen Camilla's visit to Bath, but I'll just update you on what's happened to the missing monkey that escaped from a zoo in the Scottish Highlands. I'm pleased to tell you the escaped macaque monkey has been found after being tracked down by thermal imaging drones after eating some birdseed in a residential garden. He's been safely captured, and I can tell you the elusive monkey, named Honshu, a Japanese macaque, of course, was discovered in a local garden this morning, and park officials responded to the call and took him back to the zoo, where he's now undergoing a health check by keepers. I hope you're happy now, Jacob. Back to you in Scunthorpe.
Welcome to Scunthorpe. We're here because of steel closures threatening this country at the moment because of the green agenda. This street was built in the 1860s to house steel workers, and this town has had a wonderful history as one of our most important manufacturing towns. But it also deserves to have a good future as well. The beating heart of every community is its high street, and high streets across the country are facing challenges. But all communities, all high streets, are dependent on the local economy. And here in Scunthorpe, that means steel manufacturing. And we want to make sure we have the policies that support our industry rather than handicapping it. If you seek a monument, look around. The words actually of Christopher Wren. But look at the works behind me, the power that they exude, the works that from the 19th century were at the forefront of our industrial revolution at making this country great. Think of where you find steel in your daily life, in your car, in your toaster, in street lights, in everything you use there is likely to be some steel. And yet, our crazy green policies put steel manufacturing in this country at risk. our prices of energy are almost double those of the Germans, and even more when compared with the Americans, the Indians, or the Chinese. Why don't we maintain this great power that we have? Well, today the Workers' Union Unite intensified its Steel is Not for Sale campaign across Scunthorpe, and many residents have been putting up signs across the town. Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham said Unite has secured a commitment from Labour that it will invest $3 billion in UK steel. The current government must act in the national interest and provide similar guarantees to save jobs. Well, Vox Populi Vox Dei, we asked the people of Scunthorpe if they're backing this campaign and what they thought, and as ever, the people have spoken. GBNews. Oh, and you're from British Steel. Perfect. We're asking if it's important to keep steel in Scunthorpe. And I imagine with your...
It is, yeah, definitely. To be honest, what I've heard today, a lot of it closing, it's going to destroy. It's not going to be good for Scunthorpe.
Or for the country at large, because
yeah, definitely.
Making our own steel is economically important, and in terms of national security.
Yeah, obviously, and there's going to be a lot of jobs also going.
I lived near Concert Iron and Steel Company in the North East for a while, and I saw what happened there. And when the steelworks there shut down, it took them a lot of years to get back on their feet. I mean, it's a different place now, and this will suffer the same fate, I'm afraid.
Scunthorpe has been a steel town since time immemorial, and I think the heart of this town relies on the steelworks.
As it happens, while I appreciate the campaign from Unite, I think the solution to job losses in the steelworks in Scunthorpe doesn't only lie with investment, but rather through rolling back green policies. The production of steel is highly energy intensive, which means the best way the government can help keep steel jobs is by helping to keep energy costs low. But along with a lack of investment in domestic energy resources, the emissions trading scheme, which we copied from the European Union when we left, has imposed needless costs on steel production, making investment less attractive and ultimately threatening jobs. We've been running two contradictory policies. One, supporting the steel industry by providing some subsidies, and the other, making energy more expensive and thus making steel production untenable. Well, I'm very pleased to be joined now by the local Conservative MP for Scunthorpe, Holly Mumby-Croft, and North Lincolnshire Labour councillor, Tony Gosling. Thank you very much for joining me. But it's time to get questions from the people of Scunthorpe, the people who have come along to this meeting. And I think the first question is from Steve Ayres. Steve, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. The former First Minister of Wales recently stated that the closure of the blast furnaces at Port Talbot was because of Brexit. Do you think that's true?
I think the former First Minister of Wales blames everything on Brexit. He blames his mad scheme to have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits on Brexit. It's got absolutely nothing to do with Brexit. It is to do with high energy prices, and we have even higher prices than other people within the European Union, for which there is no need. But, Holly, what's your thought on steel and Brexit and particularly energy prices?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's nothing whatsoever to do with Brexit. And, in fact, what Brexit did was give us the opportunity to make some of those decisions, like we saw with the extensions of the steel safeguards. We've had that twice under the Tory government, and that was incredibly important to protect us from cheap foreign imports. So what Brexit actually did for steel was allow us to have that autonomy over some of those decisions. But of course, what Jacob says is correct. The facts speak for themselves. We are paying a tremendous amount for energy in this country, and that makes making steel at a competitive price, despite the fact we're making the very best products in the world, and I'm incredibly proud of the steel that we make here in Scunthorpe and everyone who makes it. It's really, really difficult to do that in a competitive way.
Tony, do you agree with that? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, and I also think that we can't quantify if Brexit was an issue, but I did serve on Tata's European Works Council when the Long Products Division was part of the Tata Group, and there were problems way back when, which were long before Brexit. But I can tell you that here in Scunthorpe, one of our premier products is rail. We a big producer of rail, quality rail that is, and we are capped on our exports into Europe, which has obviously an effect locally on the steel industry. So I know it's working, the European Union is working against us in that specific area.
And you actually work at British Steel?
I work on the blast furnaces, yes, and you walk around my old houses there, where I used to live in the Ironstone village, which was founded by Roland Wynne, who was the first man to find iron ore in this area. I lived on Wynne Street. My great-grandmother lived in William Street. Obviously, I'm fourth-generation steel worker. My wife works in the steel industry. Obviously, her father, my father. It's a long tradition, and that's what happened in this town. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this audience that have followed their ancestors into the steel industry locally.
Well, we've got another question from Paul Mansfield. Paul, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. Is it right that steelworks should be owned by foreign countries? And is it a risk of national security?
I don't know, Tony, what you think. My concern is that we maintain our own production capacity rather than who particularly owns it, because the Chinese owners of British Steel put quite a lot of money in to keep it going.
Well, I've worked for several owners now, and what is key to the steel industry in this town is keeping it alive and keeping it employing people, and so it doesn't really matter to us who we work for. It's the quality of the product that we produce, the fact that we've got high-quality, highly paid jobs and skills within the town that are retained, and I've worked for several companies, Tata, Grey Bull, and now Yingye.
And electric arc furnaces, do you think they will be a satisfactory replacement?
No, because of the high energy costs that you've got, and also there's only 13% of scrap that can go into the electric arc furnace system, and you also need to, after steel's been recycled 3 times, you need to add direct reduced iron into the process, because the Fe content is obviously reduced, and you can only put boss-made scrap into EAF furnaces.
So, Holly, are you concerned about the nationality of the owners, or more, as I am, about the fact that we need to keep production in the UK?
You've got a Labour politician and a Conservative politician sat here agreeing, and that just shows the importance of what we're talking about, I think. The blast furnaces, the equipment is cemented into our town. It's cemented into the ground in Scunthorpe. It's not going anywhere from that point of view. And, of course, the skills are here and the people with the experience and the expertise are here. So I'm not overly worried about whether it's a foreign owner or not. And I think, we were pragmatic in 2019. The government were paying people's wages. We were really in trouble here, and we had to find a buyer. And Yingye were here, and they were happy to come in to make some of those investments, and we were pragmatic, and we took a decision.
Well, I hope, Paul, that answers your question, but I know, Elaine Marsh, you've got a question for us, please.
Yes, hello. It's recently been suggested that war may be an inevitability, and we should be conscripting into the armed services. How exactly does the government intend to arm its forces if we have no steel production left in the race to net zero? Are we really relying on China?
Well, I think Elaine's really hit the nail on the head with that question, that how are we going to be safe? And surely the safety of the nation comes before net zero as an ambition, Holly.
Well, look, this is something I've raised continually in Westminster. In fact, I raised it twice, I think, last week as well, because I completely agree with you. It is a strategically important industry. It is something that is a sovereign capability, in my opinion. We must have a virgin steel-making capability in this country, and I unapologetically say that to my colleagues and within Parliament, to Secretaries of State, to Ministers, and that is my absolute firm view. And for lots of the reasons that Tony said as well, we know that we will continue to need to use virgin steel. Even if we move to electric arc furnaces, we're still going to need some input of virgin steel. So around the net zero stuff, can it really be right that we import that virgin steel from abroad, put it on a diesel ship and bring it here? That doesn't even suit the net zero agenda, and it certainly doesn't suit us here in Scunthorpe. So my view, absolutely firmly, is we have to have some virgin steel capacity, and with the very sad news that came from Port Talbot, that has to be in Scunthorpe, and I will continue to say that and to fight for that in Westminster, because it's my genuine belief that we must have that.
Tony.
I too am very protective of our armed forces because I'm a veteran myself. I served in Gulf War I and Bosnia with the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, but I was actually a 1721st Lancer. I was a Challenger tank gunner, hence I've got no hearing left. But yes, I'm very defensive of the armed forces, and I would not like to see our strategic capability undermined in any way. And of course, some of my former colleagues are now working on the Challenger 3 development and producing Britain's next generation of tanks. And I'm always interested in tanks, being a former tank gunner.
OK, well, can I just quickly ask the audience, who here favours net zero over steel production? Can you hands up if you favour net zero, if you think that's the more important challenge? Anyone? So, who favours steel production and national security? Well, I do too. I'm going to put both my hands up. I think that's very clear. So thank you very much to my panel and to the audience. We're going to be back in a moment, and we're going to be discussing immigration, among other things.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christies Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christies Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation, live from the Frodingham Community Centre in Scunthorpe. We've been discussing the effects of the net zero agenda on the cost of energy and how this poses serious risks to steel jobs in this area. But now we're going to move on to perhaps the second most important subject to this audience, at least: immigration, both legal and illegal. This week, we have seen the House of Lords debating the safety of Rwanda bill, and it's clear that there is an agenda in the upper house to try and delay the plan. But while the Rwanda plan may not be perfect, there seems to be no viable alternative. Meanwhile, on the question of legal migration, we've seen the Office for National Statistics release its latest projections for the UK population growth, with revive estimates suggesting that the UK will reach 70 million people by 2026, mainly owing to immigration. Well, with me now is my most intellectual panel, the economist and fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, Catherine McBride, and GB News senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. And once again, we're going to questions from the audience, and I think Ron Gilliard has a question for us. Ron.
Evening, Jacob. Mine's a bit of a cliched question, but I'll ask it anyway. What can be done to stop the boats, and when?
Well, it's a very important question. Other countries have done it. Australia particularly managed to do it, and it did a version of Rwanda. And that's why I've always thought Rwanda is the right way to go. It's the one thing that would act as a real deterrent, because people crossing the Channel don't want to go to Rwanda. That's not that Rwanda isn't safe, but they're trying to get to the UK, not to Rwanda. And that it's a way of deterring them and stopping this illegal trade that is leading to people dying in the Channel. So I think it's the only viable option. We can't turn the boats round as they did in Australia, because there's no international water between us and the French, and we can't invade Calais. But that may be a rather aggressive policy. Nigel.
I don't think Rwanda works. That on the basis that you're talking about 1 in 100 people would probably end up there under the present plans, so it doesn't become much of a deterrent. When it comes to Ron's question about how do you stop the boat, well, the chances are we won't stop them for quite some time. However, if only we would actually look a bit more long-term. So, for instance, we changed the asylum system. At the moment, you have a system whereby you can only claim asylum in Britain if you're on British soil. If we could find a way of changing that, that would deter people from crossing the Channel, but there'd be no point. So, for instance, Labour have got an idea in their 5-point immigration plan, which would be to have settlement schemes whereby people with connections to the UK could apply for asylum somewhere else, say a refugee camp or something like that. That doesn't mean they'd all get it. The rules would be exactly the same as they are now, but it would take away the pull the Channel has got.
Catherine.
I would say that the Australian system would work for us, but it was more complicated than just taking people to another location. First of all, they made it easy for people to apply, and they could only apply from embassies outside of Australia. So they did reverse that policy. They also put up a lot of notices in all of the places where the boats left, explaining this in every language possible of this is how you apply to get to Australia. So you didn't get taken straight to Nauru, but they did know that everyone they were taking to Nauru Island was definitely not a proper asylum seeker. But the UK does bring in a lot of asylum seekers who've come from eligible places like Hong Kong, Ukraine and Afghanistan, and they did that outside of the UK. So you don't have to be...
We've got another question from Clive Pemberton. Clive, do you want to fire away at us?
Evening, Jacob. Was it a mistake by Rishi Sunak to sack Suella Braverman?
Well, Catherine, I didn't give you much chance to answer last time, so what do you think about that?
Well, I think it was a mistake for him to agree with her with the whole legal list. He should have known she was a lawyer, that he would support her immigration plan, and then to renege on that. I think that was his big mistake. After doing that, it doesn't really matter. If he didn't sack her, she would have left, I think. But I think that was the thing that is most shocking, that she'd actually supported his leadership bid by agreeing between the two of them that this is what he would do, and then he reneged on it.
Nigel?
Yeah, I just think that on this particular case, that she was using a lot of inappropriate language, but the straw that broke the camel's back was to write an article criticising the police for double standards, because she was saying they weren't policing protests properly, hitting hard on the right wing, not hitting hard on Palestinian protesters. That was in direct contravention to orders from Number 10. And quite simply, like any boss, Rishi Sunak was left with no alternative but to fire her. So that's the reason she got sacked.
But the one thing I would add is that had Suella backed Boris the year before, Boris would have come back as Prime Minister. Her support for Rishi was absolutely fundamental. Steve Moore, do you want to send your question winging its way to us? Winged words.
Good evening, Jacob. Do the population projections from this week that the UK could reach 70 million people by 2026 suggest that the Conservatives have betrayed their voters?
Well, I think betray is a very strong word, but I think migration, legal migration, has been much too high, and that in a way we've been distracted by illegal migration. If you think in the 2 years to June of 2023, 1.4 million people net entered this country. That's against 40,000 who came in illegally in each year, so 80-odd thousand altogether. That's a much bigger number, and the 70 million is, to my mind, unsustainable. We cannot get there unless we have lots of other policy changes on houses and road building and hospitals and so on. But Nigel?
I would like immigration not to be a numbers game. Yeah, I think that figure's horrific. It sounds, when it comes to to 70 million, that seems an incredible amount. But the whole point is that legal migration, as opposed to illegal, has got to be based on the needs of the British economy. So, for instance, we've got 150,000 vacancies in the care sector, 120,000 vacancies in the NHS that we just can't fill. So if you're bringing people in to do those specific jobs, that's fine. Yes, let's try and get British people to do those jobs. It'll help that no longer can bosses bring in people for 80% of a British wage. Now they have to pay the full amount. Good.
But let Catherine get a word in edgeways.
Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, well, I think that you've just hit the nail on the head. I mean, this has been a policy of lowering wages. This is not a policy. This is bringing in workers for 80% of what a British person would pay. And when you say, oh, we can't get people to do those jobs, no, what you mean is you can't get it to do those jobs at that price. If you doubled the wages, they would do those jobs. And that is the key thing, and that, I think, is where it's a problem. I mean, a good 2/3 of the people who are coming in are either students who are paying a small fortune to get a degree without the prerequisite A-levels, we've discovered, and that's bringing money into the country. But it's what they're doing to the wages is terrible.
Well, I completely agree with that. Thank you, everyone. And to my panel, to Nigel and Catherine. Nigel is the most civilised socialist we ever come across. I'm very pleased to have him join me every week. After the break, the messages from our sponsors will be opening up to a wide range of subjects from the audience, everything from the triple lock to council bankruptcies to the looming Cashless Society. This is State of the Nation on GB News live in Scunthorpe.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christies Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christies tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation, live from the Frodingham Community Centre in Scunthorpe. We've been discussing both illegal and legal migration in light of the Rwanda bill in the House of Lords, as well as the ONS's population growth projections. Still with me now is my panel, Catherine McBride, the economist and fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy, and GB News' very own senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. But now we're going to cover a wide range of subjects from a number of members of the audience. First of all, Michelle Moore. Michelle, over to you.
How is the government going to deal with councils that are declaring bankruptcy? Is it time to go through all their accounts and really see where all our money goes and on whom?
Well, I think that's a very powerful question. Nigel, councils just are terrible squanderers of money sometimes, aren't they? And then they expect the taxpayer to bail them out.
Well, they also have a lot of expenses. Social care falls in councils, education falls in councils, our bin collections, and they've had their central government funding cut by 40% since 2010, so no wonder they're in trouble. Some are incompetent, I accept, but an awful lot of them have had higher costs, less money coming in, council tax capped. The alternative would be huge council tax rises, and no one wants that.
Catherine?
Well, I would suggest that this is such a great idea to have full transparency and see where the money is going and how they're spending it, because I do believe that there have been some disastrous things happening with the councils where some of them have invested in things that they knew nothing about, lost a lot of money. There have been some very strange things that really need to be opened up. Before there's any government help, we have to know where the money went.
Yeah, I think taxpayers too much of a soft option most of the time. But Graham Baker, you've got a question for us. Graham.
Good evening, Jacob. Will the Conservatives continue to guarantee the triple lock for pensions?
Well, I'm going to ask Nigel to see what would Labour do?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think it matters who gets in. The triple lock eventually will have to go because it's not sustainable. I think what will end up happening is that we keep the link between earnings and inflation, but the problem one is the 2.5% guarantee, no matter what the situation is. So the 2.5% guarantee has been used 4 times the last 10 years. It's increased pensions by about 60% compared to what, say, earnings would do. That'd be about 40%. So I know it's bad news, but I really don't think it's sustainable to hang on to that.
Catherine?
I think they probably will hang on to it, actually, because I think inflation is coming down. So it might not be the last couple of years, people have seen a very large rise, but I don't think that's going to continue. And I think you'll find that they'll change it the other way by increasing the retirement age. As people are living longer and living healthier lives, you'll probably find that we'll just retire later, which would, I think, be the solution. Because when they introduced it in 1948, the average life expectancy for a man was 67. So that, you know...
I think that's right. I think the retirement age is going to have to rise. I think the Tories will really want to keep the triple lock, but ultimately we are going to need to have more children to be able to pay for the people who are retiring, because we need a domestic workforce. Now, I've led the way. I've had 6. So if I would encourage you to join me in having as many children as possible. And on that happy note, thank you. My children will be very flattered. Can I now bring in Jackie Beaumont, please? Jackie.
Good evening. Recently, the cafe at our local Tesco's in Cleethorpes became cashless. And some of our local residents with special needs were unable to use their own money to pay for their food. So the care workers had to come in and pay with their cards. Jacob, is there a way to stop the country from becoming cashless?
Well, I think it's partly up to all of us. I find I use cash for about two things. One is to pay taxi drivers because they prefer it, and the other is to give my children pocket money, and as I've just said, I've got lots of them. But if we use cash, then people will accept cash, and if we embarrass companies like Tesco's, who really ought to bring back cash at their Cleethorpes cafe, then I think companies will respond. But it's as much market forces as it is government regulation. But, Catherine, let me bring you in.
Well, I do think that we're going to see this. I rarely use cash these days. And for an industry or a company, the multinational, something like Tesco, it's much cheaper to not take cash because there's never any problem balancing the cash, the till at the end of the day. No one has to take the cash to the bank. There's no robbery chance and things like that. However, for a private business, you should be allowed to use cash if you like. And if you are the person behind the till or at the bar in the pub or whatever, then that's your responsibility and you should be able to manage that.
Nigel, isn't the state suspicious of cash because it thinks people are using it for nefarious purposes, but actually most people use cash for a perfectly reasonable, respectable purpose?
Yeah, I mean, they always have been suspicious. The taxman's always suspicious of cash payments. I mean, I'm not the world's greatest capitalist, as you just pointed out, but I think that I do agree that it's market forces here. That it's up to all of us, if we want to preserve cash, is to demand to use it wherever we can, to not go to shops which will only take credit cards, to keep pestering them to actually take both credit cards and cash. It's the only way we're going to keep it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to the cafe, order lots of things, and when they say they won't take cash, give it back to them and say, oh, well, I can't pay. That'll teach them. Paula, can I bring in Paula Barlow, please?
Good evening. When the Conservatives get wiped out at the next election, do you think that a new party with the proper Conservative values will rise from the ashes?
This is the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang song. From the ashes of disaster, grow the roses of success. Catherine, are we going to grow the roses of success?
Well, I hope they do, but I'm not sure. I think obviously it's going to depend on which Conservatives hold their seat. And if it's proper Conservatives, I'm sure they will rebuild the party. But unfortunately, the broad church is too broad and it's helping no one.
Nigel, watching it from outside, do you think the party will be able to reform in this way, or do you think it won't be as bad as is being forecast?
I think the Tory party will always survive. But at the moment, for some reason, they're having a battle for their heart and soul at the moment when they should really be concentrating on government. So better they have that battle in opposition. What it'll depend on is just which MPs come back. The One-Nationers who are moderates, if they're the ones who come back, they'll elect the next leader. If it's Jacob's mob, it'll be the right-wingers, and we know how that'll go.
All right, well, Paula, I'll do my best to survive on that basis. Can I now bring in Natalia Redfern, please?
Hello, I am Russian, though I've lived in England for 19 years now. I am strongly against the war in Ukraine, and I would like to hear your views, please, as to when you think the war in Ukraine will end and how.
Well, thank you for that really important question, and we should be so worried about international affairs at the moment. We don't spend enough time talking about it, and it's a very dangerous world. My view is that Putin must be stopped. And we cannot give in until that has happened, and we must carry on supporting Ukraine until that happens. Nigel?
Yes, every word of that. Yes, absolutely, we must keep supporting Ukraine. As for when it'll actually end, I don't know. That's the saddest thing about it. It seems to have become very much like the First World War. Both sides in trenches. It's a war of attrition. I can't see a way out of it unless something happens in Russia and Putin is, for some reason, removed or overthrown.
We've got to move on, unfortunately, but I do just want to thank Natalia for coming and say how important it is that we respect loyal Russians who are British subjects and are loyal to this country now. So thank you for coming and for your loyalty to this country. Thank you to everyone, and particularly to my panel. After the messages from our sponsors, we'll be returning to the main reason why we came here in the first place, steel. I'll be speaking to a man who worked at the steelworks just down the road for nearly half a century. Plus, some potentially good news for Scunthorpe from the leader of North Lincolnshire Council. This is State of the Nation, GB News, live in Scunthorpe.
On Patrick Christies tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, forced to quit the job he loves after death threats from Islamist extremists and an arson attack. Tory MP Mike Freer is live in my studio. The manhunt is underway for a vile alleged acid attacker. I speak to one acid attack victim about their struggles. I'm also joined by renowned podcaster Konstantin Kisin. Are we seeing a rise of sectarian politics in Britain and cultural issues after one girl was prevented from going to Pakistan for an arranged marriage, aged just 13 years old? It's a brand spanking new Patrick Christies tonight. It's 9 to 11 p.m. Be there.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christies tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christies tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation, live from Frodingham Community Centre in Scunthorpe. We've been discussing everything from a cashless society to the triple lock. But now I wanted to return to the main reason why I came to Scunthorpe to begin with, steel. The steelworks just down the road is a pivotal part of this community. Once again, its existence is threatened. Steel and iron manufacturing began here more than 150 years ago in the 1860s when iron making started at the Trent Ironworks. Indeed, a number of our audience members are third-generation steelworkers. So we came here and thought it only right to speak to somebody who knows a thing or two about steel. Mr. Christies, who worked at the steelworks. Well, I said nearly half a century. He says I'm making him old. It's only a mere 43 years. And so, Chris, thank you very much for coming. You worked in the steel industry for 43 years, and obviously you want to keep steel going here.
Certainly.
But you think it can be done with the net zero agenda. Tell me about that.
I think it is essential that it's done with the net zero agenda, because I don't think people will buy steel that's made in the way it's, without it being low carbon. And the other thing is, I think that electrical power from renewables will be cheaper than any other power.
And so you think that can be done in a reasonable amount of time, and that we can keep steel going and make it green?
The only way you sell steel is by price. So you've got to... somebody said we make the best steel. We make steel to a certain quality. If you don't make the quality, you don't sell it. It comes back.
Yes.
So we then sell it on price. And a third of the costs in steel are energy. Maybe a third used to be, it's a while since I was there, but I've retired, but maybe a third of it was employment costs and then the capital cost. And as I see it, you've got to have the cheapest energy. You're dead right about that. And in the future, the cheapest energy will be solar, wind. It won't be from coal, it won't be from fossil fuels.
So in a way you think I asked the wrong question. It's not a choice of steel and net zero, or net zero, it's a choice of steel and net zero, and to get to it with the newer forms of energy, even if they're a bit more expensive now, in the long term that will be cheaper and more efficient.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining me. 43 years is a very good innings. I'm also joined by the leader of North Lincolnshire Council, Rob Waltham, who will be is about to reveal to us some potentially positive news for Scunthorpe. What is this exciting news? Let's have something positive, because we've been a bit gloomy about job losses.
Well, you know, I think it is. You know, I mean, steel is very much, you've heard this evening, an important part of, you know, my dad worked there, many of my family worked there. It was an important part of our economy. But we have to look for future opportunities to create jobs locally. So we're working closely with British Steel and the government to realise some of that land, because a lot of the land has been, you know, underutilised for forever. And you know, and you're absolutely right, Chris. I agree. We've got to bring, you know, other elements of energy sources. Hydrogen, we hear a lot about. We think it can be transformation. We think actually the blast furnaces ultimately might be able to be used by hydrogen, and that's common sense. You know, it's critical that we tap some of that, and you know, we can bring jobs using it. And really, I'd say Scunthorpe is the epicentre of what the hydrogen revolution can be, using the British Steel site, using it potentially to fuel the blast furnaces. And, you know, that's new. Yeah, I get that that's not been done, you know, with any great success yet, but I think we can, you know, show a bit of vision and make a difference with that.
So you've got this 300-acre site.
Yeah.
What will be there? What type of industries are you expecting to set up there?
I mean, the key is clearly always energy source. So, yeah, I think, you know, we can certainly use more wind, we can certainly use more, as battery capacity gets better, we can use solar better, because clearly that it's the uninterrupted supply that much of heavy industry relies on, and we want to keep being in a heavy industry. But we'll be looking for sectors that work well with steel, because you see, steel has to stay in our economy, and we want to make sure that we use, you know, attract other businesses that will bounce off the steel, make sure we've got, you know, I mean, I don't know, it could be anything from logistics through to, and that's exactly what what we're working on with British Steel now. So there's got to be something positive for younger people to be passionate about steel and the other jobs that come with it.
And have you got some of the investment lined up already to go into this?
We're working on it. We're doing the master planning of the site. We're phasing it clearly. I mean, anybody who's lived in this town know bits of the site are more developable than others. You know, there are bits that clearly should have been reclaimed many years ago. So it's going to be a big job, but we think there's 65 acres that could be realised pretty quick. You know, we're working closely with, you know, British Steel to make that work. You know, we've had the recent announcement about carbon capture and storage, which I think is exactly the point that Chris is
making. Yes.
Yeah, you could keep blast furnaces going if you could use the carbon capture, and we've had some good news on that as well.
Can I just make the point? Because when I first started, I started on a place called Norby Park Steelworks, and I put 3 computers on the mill, and I got it all finished, and then I think it was Margaret Thatcher shut it down. She announced it. I finished in the stop period in the summer, and they announced the closure in the at Christmas, and it was shut by the next April. Yeah. But Norby Park Steelworks, as was, he's now has got all sorts of industries on it, all sorts of little, relatively little
big stuff.
And you could do the same thing. In fact, you have to do the same thing, and you have to educate people, you have to retrain them, and you have to get them to do jobs that maybe don't exist at the minute. But you've got to move forward, and people in Scunthorpe could do that.
Well, brilliant. Thank you both very much. We've now got not Barrage the Farage, because obviously I'm not Nigel Farage, but Mug the Mog. So a few quick-fire questions. Not mug, literally, I hope. But we're going to start with Mark Lilly.
Good evening, Jacob. It's an awful long way from God's own county of Somerset. Have you seen anything of Lincolnshire this afternoon, and were you impressed by anything you saw?
I have seen a bit of Lincolnshire as I came. Actually, I was driving here. I saw a practice display, I assume it was, by the Red Arrows, so that was pretty exciting and a good introduction. My youngest sister actually lives in Lincolnshire, so I do come to Lincolnshire from time to time. This is my first visit to North Lincolnshire, and it's a wonderful place. I've had a lovely time here. I did some vox pops, as you saw, in the high street, and people were so friendly and welcoming. And it's a different countryside from Somerset. As I say, it's slightly flatter, but it's also wonderfully beautiful. So now, Heather Kinman, you've got a very difficult question for me, I think.
Hello. Yes. Would you ever stand for Prime Minister?
Well, you know the answer to that, and you've all heard it before. I've got no ambitions in this direction. But if my friends and colleagues advise me that I'm some... and the good people of Scunthorpe advise me in some humble capacity I could serve my country, I might feel it my public duty. That's enough from me, at any rate, and from all of us here in Scunthorpe. Up next, it's Patrick Christies. Patrick, what have you got this evening?
Well, I'd just like to say hello to the fair people of Scunthorpe, first of all, Jacob. Cracking show. But look, very serious topics on the agenda tonight. An asylum seeker is on the run after a suspected alkaline attack. We'll give you all the breaking news on that. I am joined by a very, very brave acid attack survivor to relive their story for us as well. And I'll join live by Tory MP Mike Freer for the latest on his decision to stand down amidst Islamist extremism. All to play for tonight.
Oh, thank you, and do say to Mike how sorry I am he feels he's got to stand down. I think that's just a horrid decision for him. I can tell my guests here that you sent your greetings from Patrick Christies to the good people of Scunthorpe. This is all from me until next week. I'll be back on Monday. But now it's going to be the weather, and I have a special announcement. The weather in Somerset will be wonderful, but in Scunthorpe the sun will be shining too. It'll be glorious and happy in Scunthorpe. Thank you.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alex Berkill. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast. Through the end of the week, it is going to be largely cloudy, mild, but also windy, because we have a tight pressure gradient across the UK. An area of high pressure to the south of us leading to a westerly flow, and that westerly flow will push the heavy rain that we saw across much of Scotland through today towards the east overnight, and we are going to drag in increasing amounts of cloud from the west. So some clearer skies towards the southeast to start the night means it may start a little chilly, a touch of frost, but as the cloud rolls in, we are going going to see our temperatures lifting. So by the time many of us wake up tomorrow, it's going to be quite a mild start. Some places already in double figures. Otherwise, as we go through Friday, and it's a much cloudier day than today for most of us, outbreaks of rain where the cloud is thick enough, particularly towards the west. Perhaps something a bit more persistent across parts of Scotland into Northern Ireland for a time. In the east, this is where we have the greatest chance of some brighter skies and where it's going to be mildest, highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius. But you do need to factor in some strong winds, risk of gales in exposed spots and around higher ground too. On Saturday, it's going to be a cloudier, wetter picture across southern areas, staying mild here. A bit chillier further north though, albeit with some sunny skies and blustery showers could bring some sleet or snow over the higher ground of Scotland. Into Sunday, and I think the mild picture will become more widespread again, though it is looking quite cloudy with outbreaks of rain too. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news.